Okay, hello friends. Moadim Simcha. I hope you all had an enjoyable Yom Tov. Welcome to the Chavurah Public Shiur, where we'll be exploring the world of Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine. Leading us in our exploration today is Dr. Roy Shasha. Dr. Shasha has a PhD in theology from Manchester University. He has edited and published 12 books and many more articles of works by Sephardi Chachamim. He is currently engaged in collecting and publishing the works of Rav Shemtob Gaguine, including a new edition of the Keter Shemtob. He has already published 2 volumes of his sermons, including a number of his smaller manuscripts. Dr. Shasha is a lifelong member of the S&P community and has written the most modern monograph on the history and the printing of the S&P prayer book in England. He has made Aliyah 9 years ago and lives in our Ir Bira, Yerushalayim. It is a privilege to have him here with us. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone about our Sukkot book that the Chavurah Publishing House just put out. Our book includes essays from past Chachamim, teachers of the present, and a selection of our members from around the world. I actually have the privilege of having my essay in the book as well. Make sure to get yourself a copy. It is on Amazon Prime, so you can get one before the Moed is over. With that said, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much, Dr. Shasha. The floor is yours.
Okay, Ohad, share the screen. I'm not on the screen. Am I live now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, super. Okay, let's get started then. Moadim Simcha, and thanks everyone for joining me. I'm in Jerusalem now, and I'm sitting in my lounge in about 2 miles from where Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine was born. I came from Manchester, which is where Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine lived part of his life and passed away. It occurred to me in the course of editing some of his manuscripts, behind the Keter Shemtob, which is a book that deals with minhagim and with customs of Jews from all over the world, that there's a backstory to this. And without the backstory, it's a little bit hard to appreciate. So what I wanted to do this evening is to talk a little bit about his life, his times, his family, and the community with which he grew up. And from there, see how this affected his writing. We'll talk about the Keter Shemtob and look at 1 or 2 examples of the customs that he mentions there. And then after that, we'll look at hopefully at some of the manuscripts that he left behind him. And I'm going to make the suggestion from now that whilst he will always be known for the Keter Shemtob, and it is his most complete work and his longest work, maybe it wasn't necessarily his greatest achievement in this world, as perhaps we'll see. Anyway, let's start by looking at his family history. The Gaguine family came from Spain. We know that they came from Castile, and they lived for a while in Fez. And sometime probably in the 16th or the early part of the 17th century, they found themselves in Jerusalem. And for many generations, there were great scholars, rabbis. They left books behind, some in manuscripts, some printed. And he came from a long, long tradition of rabbis, of sages, and of teachers. What is interesting is that he has rabbinical blood on many different sides of his family. And I'm going to start off by talking about another strand of his family, which is his great grandfather. He was Roy Shasha of Shalom Sharabi, and he came from Yemen to Jerusalem in the 18th century, in the middle of the 18th century. And he was one of the foremost Kabbalists of Jerusalem. And he was appointed the head of what's called the Yeshiva of Bet-El. The Yeshiva of Bet-El was not what you might call a yeshiva today, in that it was not for unmarried young pupils, but for the most senior sages of Jerusalem at the time, all of which were great Kabbalists and tremendous Talmidei Hachamim. And he was the head of the yeshiva. And his daughter married Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine's great-grandfather, who was Rav Avraham Gaguine, who was the Rishon LeZion. He was a Hacham Bashi, appointed by the Sultan in Istanbul. And he also led the Yeshiva of Bet-El. He was a great Kabbalist, as was Rabbi Sharabi. And he also left a number of important books behind him. His son was called Rav Shalom Moshe Chai Gaguine, he also was a Kabbalist. He served in the Yeshiva Bet El also, and he was a Dayan in Jerusalem. One of his children was Rabbi Gaguine, who served as the Menahel of the Yeshiva of Bet El. He was also a noted Kabbalist and also was a leading dignitary in Jerusalem. And his eldest son was Shemtob Gaguine, and he was born in Jerusalem in 1884. We don't know that much about his early life, but his parents made one decision, a major decision, which was somewhat quirky for the time, and that is that they sent him to a school called Doresh Zion. Doresh Zion was a very radical school for Jerusalem at that time because part of the curriculum was devoted to secular studies, the teaching of foreign languages and basic maths and geography and history and whatever, apart from a Limudei Kodesh curriculum. And at the time, this was, as I said, a very revolutionary and way out thing to do for the Orthodox life of the old Yishuv. And there are reports of the Hebra Kadisha of Jerusalem leaving their funeral cart outside the headmaster's door. This was a traditional sign of communal disapproval of the institution. And there's also one report of attempted physical violence against the pupils in the school during school time. But fortunately, Shemtob Gaguine passed through all of these things, and he received this slightly quirky education. Why his parents sent him there, I don't know. But otherwise, his upbringing was that of any other yeshiva student of his time. He was initiated into the rites of the Kabbalah at a very early age by a Hacham of the Yeshiva of Bet El called Hacham Alafi, who I think was of Syrian origin. And life would have continued for him like any other young yeshiva student. He might have got a place in the yeshiva. He might have got a place in the Bet in Jerusalem, but the one above had different plans for him. In 1910, the Turkish government introduced a mandatory military draft, and a lot of the young people in the Holy Land took fright of this and escaped. And he escaped to Cairo, where he got a job on the Bet Din as a Dayan, specializing in Gittin. And he had in his life two what I call light bulb moments. And one of them, I believe, was in Egypt. And the second one, we're going to come to in a few minutes, was in Manchester. But what happened in Egypt? He was browsing through an old book, which was an old copy of the Shulchan Aruch that was printed in the lifetime of the Machaber, Rabbi Yosef Karo, sometime in the early part of the 16th century. And he looked at one particular siman, which dealt with the subject of kaparot. And he found that there was a title to this section in the Shulchan Aruch, which said, Kaparot minhag shtut, which means kaparot, minhag of stupidity. And this title for Kaparot minhag shtut was suppressed in later editions. And this is something that caught his attention. And he writes about it in one of the manuscripts he left behind from this period when he was in Cairo. And we'll come to this a little bit later on. He got married in Cairo and had at least one child there. And there were certain rumblings in the community in Cairo, which he didn't like very much. And in 1920, he got an invitation to come to Manchester. Now, the community in Manchester, there was a Sephardi community in Manchester, but it consisted of two completely different strands. One strand was the establishment strand of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, which is not the strand that he went to. Because of the decline and fall of the Ottoman Empire, a lot of Jews who were living in the Ottoman Empire took fright and they came to Manchester, thinking it was a safer place. And also they came for political reasons, and also they came for economic reasons, because at the time, Manchester was the warehouse of was the manufactory of the world. And most of the people who came had trade connections throughout the Middle East. And it was easy for them to go and have someone in Manchester, especially a family member, who could assist in exporting goods from there to the Middle East. So there were two communities that were living side by side. And eventually they formed two separate congregations that lived side by side, and they prayed in two synagogues. One was about 300 or 400 yards from the other. Literally, it was 4 or 5 minutes walk away. And as a youngster growing up in this community, I could never understand why are there two synagogues, two Sephardi synagogues in this particular area of Manchester. Couldn't these two groups have ever got their heads together? But from a little bit my father told me about it, I gathered there was some lack of commonality between them, but I never really got to the bottom of it until I was older. Fate intervened again in his life. And in 1927, he was appointed the head of Montefiore College, which was in Ramsgate. I've got to explain now what Montefiore College was. So Moses Montefiore had his main residence on the south coast of England in a place called Ramsgate, a gorgeous little Georgian town on the south coast of England. And he built a synagogue there, and around him grew up a small Jewish community. When his wife passed away, he set up a yeshiva there in memory of his wife, and he wanted to attract people who would study in memory of his late wife. The college had been semi-dormant and needed a leader, and so he was appointed in 1927 as the head of the college. Before that, I should have mentioned, in 1921, the Spanish and Portuguese community had appointed him to be the Av Bet Din. So it was a natural fit with him because Moses Montefiore was part of the Spanish and Portuguese establishment in the UK. And he and all his family packed up the bags from Manchester and went to live in Ramsgate. And these were the most productive years of his life. He had colleagues that he could go and discuss Jewish matters with at a very high level. He had a vast collection of manuscripts in the library of Montefiore College at his disposal, and a vast collection of printed books. And he was very happy. And as I said, these were the most productive years of his life. In 1934, he published the first 2 volumes of his book, the Shemtob, where he looks at the minhagim of the Spanish and Portuguese community and versus the customs of other Sephardi communities and that of the Ashkenazi communities. But I'll talk more about this book a little bit later on. I want to go push on ahead with the story of his life. Fate intervened again in his life in 1939 when the Second World War broke out. Ramsgate, being on the south coast of England, was in the direct line of German bombers, and also the port itself was of crucial importance to the British naval effort in the Second World War. And so all the civilian population was evacuated. And he was evacuated to another town in Kent. It had a very, very small Jewish community, a place called Tunbridge Wells. And in this time, he had to leave his library behind. And many times in the Shemtob, in the subsequent volumes that he wrote, he laments the fact that he's away from his library, he's away from his regular place of work, he's short of books. He complains that this book isn't to hand, that book isn't to hand. But he had notes that he brought with him, and he had plenty of time to go and drive. At the end of the war, he went back to Ramsgate, but by that stage, the community had left, and none of the residents of Ramsgate, other than the members of the college, wanted to come back again. So he retired in 1949, and he went to live in Manchester, and there he passed away in 1953. That, in short, is a story of his life, and we're going to see that the scarcity of books and the Second World War impacted greatly on his book, the Shemtob. So let's look a little bit at what he tries to do in this book, in the series of books, the Shemtob. It is the most monumental work and the most thorough work that I know, dealing with laws and customs of Jews throughout the world. He mentions there laws and customs of communities that are long since dead and gone. For example, he mentions a Sephardic community in the Crimea, of all places, in a place called Karsot Bezir. He mentions customs of the Karaite community that is seen in Jerusalem. He mentions customs of a little town in France called Carpentras, which was one of the few places in France, together with Avignon, where the Jews were not expelled and could live live in peace in France in the Middle Ages. And all of these sources he pulls together, and he compares and contrasts the customs of each community that he knew. The other thing is that, rather oddly for his time, he made field trips to go and explore other Sephardi communities, to look at their customs and try and record them at first hand. And he'll say to me, what's the big deal about making a field trip to some foreign country? And it's hard to explain to people, especially people who are used to the internet, who are used to Airbnb and booking things on the internet. It's hard to imagine how hard it was to go and plan a trip and how expensive it was to go and plan a trip without all of these things. And we know, for example, that he made 4 trips to Spain and Portugal. In one of those trips, he went to Madrid. He wanted to go to the National Library. It was closed because the day that he reserved in his mind to go there was a national holiday, and he couldn't go there. In the same trip, he went to Barcelona, and he wanted to go to the library, the Central Library in Barcelona, and it was closed for refurbishment. All of these things he could have planned very easily had he had the internet, but it wasn't, and this hampered his work. But we know that he went across Europe. He went to France, he went to Vienna, he went 4 times to Spain, and then he went to Gibraltar, and then he went to Morocco. All the customs that he saw, he recorded them in his notes, and eventually spoke about them in the Shemtob. So let's dwell for a few minutes now on this book, this book and what it does and what the pattern that he finds. He looks, starting first of all, at the customs of the Spanish and Portuguese community in England and in Amsterdam, and he contrasts these with the customs of the Oriental Jews, and then looks at the wider Jewish community, including the Ashkenazim, and sees how these customs fit together or don't fit together, and the story behind them, then the history behind them. But also he looks at other issues. For example, he looks at the way that prayers are formulated and how the rules the rabbis use to go and create prayers in the language that we know. For example, we're celebrating now the festival of Sukkot. We make the blessing every day, except for Shabbat, al natilat lulav, to take the lulav. But why the rabbis pick this expression, al natilat lulav? The Torah tells us, "V'lakachtem lachem b'yom harishon." You should take it for yourself on the first day, and then all the species that we bring together. The rabbis, as a rule, tried to go and copy the language of the Torah. So why, when the Torah says "V'lakachtem lahem," did the rabbis make a blessing al natilat lulav? Also, what is the form of this blessing, al natilat lulav, or al tibilat kelim? Why do we say al something or another? When do we say to do something like leishev basukah with just a direct infinitive? What rules govern these things? These are the types of issues that he looks at: the language of the prayer, the meaning of the prayer, and the customs that are associated with them. And he comes to the conclusion very, very rapidly that the Spanish and Portuguese Jews have very little Kabbalistic input into their prayers, whereas the Oriental Jews have a large Kabbalistic input into their prayers. And the question is, why? What caused such a big rupture in Sephardi Jewry that this would happen? And one of the problems I find with the Shemtob is I used to go and dip into it a little bit here and a bit there for this festival or that festival. It's only when you go through the whole book from end to end that you can get a picture and connect various dots that from here and there to go make a comprehensive story. And in the course of working on this new edition of the Shemtob, something occurred to me. I was looking in the volume that deals with Kippur, and in Musaf, all of a sudden, the story stops very abruptly. There's nothing on half of Musaf and for only half of Musaf, nothing on the end of Musaf, and nothing on Mikha, and nothing on Ne'ilah. So fortunately, I was in contact with Shemtob Gaguine's grandson, who kindly made available to me the manuscript of this section of this work, and sent me scans of it. And I found that half of this volume was actually never printed. Why? I don't know. But it's one thing that certainly that I want to go and put into this new edition. What in the unpublished part of the Kether Shemtob that I've got in my possession, he talks about why it is that the Spanish and Portuguese Jews don't have anything or very little to do with the Kabbalah in their Nusach Tubilah or their Minhagim. And what he writes is as follows, which never really had previously occurred to me before. Kabbalah started to be promulgated throughout Europe through after the time of the pupils of the Arizal went around and tried to publicize the new teachings of the Ari. And this was more either just before or just after the time of Shabbatai Tzvi. Before that, Kabbalists tend to keep themselves, and their teachings were kept within a small clique amongst their own group, their own pupils, their own synagogue, whatever it was. They didn't go out to the masses. It was only around the time of Shabbatai Tzvi that the rabbis started to go out to the broader Jewish public and to go and bring them these new teachings of the teachings of the Kabbalah as taught by the Arizal, and how these would affect, or could or should affect, Jewish practice. And the Spanish and Portuguese Jews turned around and said, we respect you, we respect the Kabbalah, but we don't want to go and change from the traditions that we see from our parents and our grandfathers. They took with them basically the prayer book that they had in Spain, and they transported it all the way over to Amsterdam. And they kept these prayers more or less intact, and they did not want to make any changes to it. And they said, look, the Ari comes along and tells us we should make all of these changes for a variety of different reasons, maybe very valid reasons, but we want to stick to what we've got. And if we would accept the changes of the Arizal, someone may come in 100 years' time and come and say introduce more prayers here, more psalms there, more Ma'amare Chazal there. And there'll be no end to the matter. The liturgy will just grow and grow and grow. So we'll stick with what we've got and what we know. And also, our community is not the most learned of communities. I'm sure they said to those who wanted to promulgate the ideas of the Kabbalah, I'm sure your ideas are very useful, but for a community like ours, it's not going to be of much help. We are who we are, and we don't want to make any changes, not because we disagree with what you've got to say, but because it's just, the time is not right for us at the moment. And they excluded anything to do with Kabbalah from their prayers, with one or two exceptions. For example, if you look in the Hoshanot of Hoshana Rabbi, you'll see references there to all of the Sefirot. And this comes from a long piyut that was authored in Spain before the expulsion. Also, the Spanish and Portuguese have a custom of taking 5 aravot, 5 willow leaves, on 5 twigs of willow leaf on Hoshana Rabbah to beat. And Rabbi Gaguine wonders, how come the Spanish and Portuguese have actually got the same custom as the Kabbalists? So it's possible that some Kabbalistic ideas, some Kabbalistic practices found their way into the prayers of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews. What I want to try and do now is to look in the Kether Shemtob and see the types of things, the issues that he addresses, and how he looks at this tension between the Kabbalah and the practice of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews. And I'm going to take now 3 examples. In one example, there is an outright collision between the custom of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews and the custom of the Kabbalists. In another example, what the Kabbalists say, they argue is an improvement on the formulation of the prayers of Spanish and Portuguese Jews. And in the third case I want to mention, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews say that the Kabbalists are wrong. So let's look at all of these cases now and flesh them out a bit and put some little bit of meat into this what's been previously a theoretical discussion. What I'm going to do now is this. I'm going to share with everybody a picture. This is the prayer book of Menasheb ben Israel, which dates from 1636. And you'll see very clearly, Oden del Selichot de Arbit. This is the custom of saying Selichot after Arbit. What is this? The Spanish and Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam and in London, as far as I know, are the only congregations that have Selichot in the evening throughout the month of Elul and through the Aseret Yomei Teshuvah. And it's a small version of Selichot. It's not the full thing that you'll say in the morning, but this is just an abbreviation, two or three pages, just to go and get you in the mood. So you might say to me, what's the Kabbalah got to do with it? What is the big objection to saying Selichot at night? So the Chita, Rabbi Yosef Chaim David Zulai, in his book Pirkei Yosef, which is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, discusses this matter. He says as follows, that nighttime, especially before Hatzot, is a time of din, of strict divine judgment. And in this time of strict divine judgment, it's not really the best time to go and tell God all the wrong things that you've done and you're sorry about it, because you'll get met with strict justice, which is not what you want. It's far better to go and do it towards the morning time, which is a time of divine mercy. And then if you tell God, I'm sorry, I've done X, Y, and Z, I'm very sorry about it, you're likely to get a little bit of a better reception. But this is a very old custom of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews. And I'm sure that since the time of Menasheb ben Israel, who was himself something of a Kabbalist, until the present, both in London and in Manchester, there were many Hachamim of our congregation that were well aware of the teachings of the Kabbalah and were well aware of what Rabbi Azulai wrote, and were well aware that their practice was in direct contradiction to this particular teaching of the Kabbalah. But nevertheless, they persisted with it. I'm told that in London now, this custom has now ceased and Selichot is no longer said in the evenings, be that as it may. So here we've got an example of the Spanish Portuguese having a particular custom, an old, long established custom, which is in direct contradiction to the teachings of the Kabbalah. The next example that I want to talk about is the custom of kaparot, of waving a chicken around one's head on the evening of Kippur and then slaughtering the chicken. Okay, now I've got here a copy of the Shulchan Aruch, which you may not recognize because there are no glosses here of Rav Moshe Isserlis, the Ramah. This was printed in Venice in 1567. And if we look in the top left-hand corner, Siman Tafresh Hey, and it says here quite clearly, Minhag Kaparot, Minhag Shtel Shtut. This is a custom of stupidity. Whereas if you look in the writings of the Rizal in Shara Kavanot, he goes to great lengths to describe the Kabbalistic importance of this practice. How do we get then this contradiction, such a blatant contradiction between the Kabbalah and what the Shulchan Aruch has to go and say? And how does Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine, as a Kabbalist himself, go and treat this matter? And here, possibly, Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine is slightly ambivalent. How does he deal with this matter? What does he actually do? So, as is his way, he starts off by looking at the source of this practice. And he mentions a Rashi in Shabbat, which is on the source sheet that I sent to everywhere, I sent around, where Rashi mentions the practice as is recorded in the response of the Gaonim. And what he says is this, that the original practice at the time of the Gaonim was as follows, that people would take a basket made out of little strips of palm and put in it dung and all sorts of rotten stuff to make a fertile base. And sometime in the month of Elul, they would sow a few seeds inside it, and the seeds would sprout. And then they would go either Erev Rosh Hashanah or Erev Kippur or Erev Hoshana Rabbah, with a family and take this basket and throw it into the river. And they would say the same formula that we say, Zeh tahat zeh, that this is in place of a divine punishment on us. And they would throw this basket into the river. And that is the end of the matter. So it was a very vegan-friendly option. The custom of doing kaparot with a chicken seems to have come from Eastern Europe. It's recorded in the writings of the Maharil, who lived in France or Germany in the 11th, early part of the 12th century. And it seems to have been restricted to Eastern Europe. The Rabbi in Montefiore, which I think it's source number 6 on the source sheet that I sent around, mentions this custom as he had inquired from a rabbi from Montpellier about the rectitude of this custom. And he suggests that he doesn't like the idea. He doesn't like the idea of slaughtering a chicken. He says maybe it's like slaughtering a sacrifice, which is not something that we do nowadays. And he's not very happy with the idea. And he says, in where he lived, fortunately, he was able to stamp out this practice completely. However, the Ari and the Kabbalists attach great weight to this custom, and they say it's very important and it's a genuine Jewish practice, but the Spanish and Portuguese Jews never accepted it in the first place. How does Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine think about this, as he was a Kabbalist himself? He doesn't actually tell us, but what he does instead is that he tells us a story that happened in Manchester. And he says that this story happened 22 years before he wrote this passage. So I guess it was sometime around 1920. He mentions, first of all, that the Moroccan Jews had a practice that if somebody would die in a family, they would slaughter a chicken and take the chicken to the graveyard, and they would hope that the death of the chicken would stop anything further bad happening to this this family. And he records that in Manchester there was a Moroccan family, he doesn't say who lost 2 children, Baminan, in very rapid succession, and they had a 3rd child, and they really got the wind up. So they called the shohet to the house, and he told the shohet, the head of the house told the shohet to slaughter 2 chickens. He slaughtered the chickens, and he told them to go and take them to the graveyard. The shohet goes off to the graveyard with his with blood on his clothes and this bag, and he goes and asks the graveyard attendant to go and open the gates so he could go in. And the graveyard attendant was mildly suspicious why this person was turning up with blood on his garments and this bag containing heaven knows what. And so he looked to see what was going on, and he saw that the shohet was going to a grave, excavating, stuck this bag inside it, covered it up, and went out. And the graveyard attendant got the wind up. He called the police. And after that, everybody in the community was dead, was literally shaking. They didn't know what would happen. Fortunately, the truth came out and everything was okay and the matter subsided. But I'm suspecting that Shemtob Gaguine was in himself conflicted how to go and deal with this matter. How can the Shulchan Aruch say one thing, and the author of the Shulchan Aruch himself was familiar with the teachings of the Zohar, was familiar with at least some of the teachings of the Rizal. They lived in Sfat at the same time. They cannot not have known each other, and come out with 2 completely different stories. And so I leave this as a question mark. The third example that I want to take is the example of Nerot Hanukkah. And I have here to give a bit of a background to it. The Spanish Portuguese Jews have the custom of saying the blessing over the menorah, L'hadlik ner shel Hanukkah. In the same way that we say a blessing on the lights of Shabbat, L'hadlik ner shel Shabbat, we say a blessing, L'hadlik ner shel Hanukkah. According to the teachings of the Rizal, you should say the blessing without the word shel. You should say L'hadlik ner Hanukkah, not shel Hanukkah. What's the big deal about these 2 letters, shin and lamed, shel, one word, that would make it preferable that they were omitted from the prayers. So we have to here to understand what prayer is according to the Kabbalists. And I find it's hard to explain because I'm not a Kabbalist myself. But what I can do is as follows. I'm going to share with you now a page from the prayer book of Rav Shlomo Rabbi, who I mentioned before was the father of the wife of his great-grandfather, the Rishon LeZion of Abraham Gaguine. And this is a bit of an eye-opener because this is, you see here two words, Yit Kadal Yit Kadash. This is the Kaddish of the Ishtabach, the Kaddish of before Yotzer. And when these two words are said, all the data underneath is supposed to convey something to a Kabbalist, various meditations, permutations of the divine name with different vowelings, which means something to someone who's initiated into this rite. So what I'm trying to get at is, I can't describe to you what Kabbalah is, but what I can say is that it's a form of prayer which runs in parallel to that which you would understand as prayer, but is on a completely different plane, and is impossible to explain to someone who is not initiated into this rite. Let's go back now and consider first a more basic question. What actually is mysticism from a Jewish point of view? And then from here, we'll understand what is the big objection to these two words, the two letters, Shin and Lamed, Shell, you just take it into the blessing. In order to simplify a long philosophical discussion, I'm going to suggest that there are two attitudes towards Judaism. There are two philosophical attitudes that you can take. One is what I'm going to call, very roughly, a rationalist approach, which will tell us, which says as follows: the sum total of what you can get from doing a mitzvah is, for yourself, is a form of character training. For example, God does something kind to you, he brings you food, performs a miracle, you thank him. So you train yourself to be grateful to God for all the things that he does, an act of gratitude. If it is that this act may have some effect, whatever it is, in some higher world, so be it. It is not something that you can directly influence yourself, other than by doing the act in a proper way, by saying the words with proper intention and performing the act in a decent and honorable and straightforward way with the best intentions that you can. A Kabbalist would say no. A mitzvah is more in sum total training of the character. Man can effect through his actions very positive things in the mystical world. And in terms of prayer, you can do this by saying certain prayers with a certain number of words, or by arranging the prayers so that certain initials fall out in the way that you say your prayers. For example, the Kabbalistic version of the prayer of Baruch She'amar has got 87 words in it. Why? I don't really know, but for them it is important that this prayer has 87 words in it and no more. As far as the blessing for the menorah, we said the Kabbalists say Lahatlik Ner Hanukkah, and this forms the initials Nun, Ner, Chet of Hanukkah, and Lamed, Nachal. And for them, these three letters have a certain specific mystical meaning. And the Ben Ish Chai tells us two of these meanings, and probably there are many more. In the 13 attributes of divine mercy, that in the prayer that Moses offers to God, it says, Noser chesed la'alafim, who leaves over kindness for 1,000 generations. And the Ben Ish Chai also says that there's a verse in Psalm 30. Nafshenu chiketa l'Hashem, our soul waits for God. There again, you've got these three letters, Nun, Chet, and Lamed. What the significance of these three letters is, as I said, I don't know. But nevertheless, it is deemed by the Kabbalists sufficiently important that they say the blessing that you should say over the menorah is not the traditional blessing of Lahadlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, but Lahadlik Ner Hanukkah. So you get the three initials coming one after the other, Nun, Chet, and Lamed. Okay, so I've brought you now 3 examples. In one case, the Kabbalists say that the non-Kabbalists, like the Spanish and Portuguese community, is wrong in saying Slichot at night. In this example of Hanukkah, the Kabbalists say, right, you've said the blessing. They wouldn't tell you go and say repeat the blessing on the menorah all over again, but you could do more if you do it our way. And in the last example of Kaparot, the Spanish and Portuguese community and others would say to the Kabbalists, what you're doing is, in the words of the Shulchan Aruch, minhag shtut. It's just a very silly thing to go and do, and there's no foundation within Judaism to go and do such a thing. I want to draw now a big line under this, because I said at the outset, people will always remember Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine because of the Keter Shemtob. And it is his largest and most complete and most famous work, but it's not the only thing that he left. And there's one achievement that is still largely manuscript that I want to go and talk about very, very briefly. I mentioned that in his period in Cairo, he found an early edition of the Shulchan Aruch, and he found that the text of the Shulchan Aruch nowadays had at least one difference to early editions. Somehow, in the course of printing, things got twisted, probably on purpose, to go and suppress what Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of Shulchan Aruch, had to go and say. And so he decided that he wanted to go and track all the changes that he could find from the earliest editions of the Shulchan Aruch to the modern printed edition, which he tried to go and do to the best of his ability. And he had to help him a manuscript, which he said was in Ramsgate, of part of the Shulchan Aruch, a manuscript version that was written in the lifetime of the author. And it must have been very shortly after it was written, because very shortly after it was written, it got to printing. So how he got a fragment of it, I don't know. There is a problem, though. This fragment is untraceable. It's not in the library of Montefiore College. It was never in the library of Montefiore College. I know that because I had correspondence with the librarian. So where it is, I don't know. And he had early printed editions of the Shulchan Aruch, and he wrote this vast commentary where he goes through all of the changes in the Shulchan Aruch that he can find, and any differences that they could make in the halacha or in Jewish practice. And I'll give you an example. It's something that he discusses in the Keter Shemtob in the first volume. We make a blessing when we count the Omer, and then we count the Omer for 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot. And we count, today is the first day, today is the second day, today is the third day of the Omer. What happens after day 7? You'd say Hayom Shmona Yamim. First of all, La Omer or Ba Omer. If you're a Sephardi, you're going to say Ba Omer. We don't say La Omer. So we say La Omer, not Ba Omer. And so the 33rd day for us is not Lag Ba Omer, it's Lag La Omer. And he traces this change from the Lamed, which is in the original version, to the Bet, and tells us in which printing that he found it in. Also, we count the Omer, there again on the 8th day, we say Hayom Shmona Yamim La Omer, Shehem Shavuot Echad V'Yom Echad. And the Sephardim will cut there. The Ashkenazim will add on an extra word. They'll say Hayom Shmona Yamim La Omer, Shehem Shavuot Echad V'Yom Echad La Omer or Ba Omer. But this Ba Omer is not really necessary because it's self-understood that it's the 8th day, and you've already counted it. It's the 8th day of the Omer. So why do you need to say it's the Omer again? And then again, traces this to a quirk in the printing, either on purpose or by accident, and how this has become incorporated into the liturgy. The one thing, though, that he perhaps didn't give attention to in all of his research is how how did these changes occur? Why should a printer go and change? If he sees in front of him lag la omer, why should he change it to lag ba omer? And here I want to bring a suggestion to you, which may account for some of the changes that we have got in our liturgy. The liturgy is so vast that it cannot be transmitted accurately by any way other than printing. And if you print and you make a printing mistake, the printing mistake is going to be multiplied by 1,000. A Jewish scribe or Jewish compositor would have a job of preparing a text, but he would also try and correct the text in front of him to the best of his abilities. If he would come from a place where the custom was to go and say, today is the day of the Omer, and count it La Omer, he would put a lamed there if he saw a bet, and the other way around, if he saw a bet and he knew it should be a lamed, thought it should be a lamed, that's what he would put in. And so what scribal practice or printing would go and do was that at the place where the corrector is, he would try and make a correction himself, a hyper correction, according to the minhag of the place that he was. And so every time a manuscript was reproduced, it wasn't necessarily reproduced faithfully. The scribe or the compositor might have thought he was doing a faithful job, but it's not necessarily the case. And so because of this, numerous variances became institutionalized into the Hebrew liturgy. And I'll give you one further example, which is discusses in the Shemtob. He talks about the liturgy of Yom Kippur, and he finds that the Sephardim of the Spanish and Portuguese Sephardim and the Sephardim of the Middle East have a different tradition. We say in the Amidah, Baharisha, Kulo ka ashantikle or ba ashantikle. Obviously, between a bet and a chav, there is a difference, which is a very easy difference to go and creep into the liturgy. One reflects the language of the pasuk and the other one doesn't. So the one that reflects the language of the pasuk is more likely to be correct. And the other one is just an error, which is understandable. And this is how mistakes crept into the liturgy, through either through copyist errors or through a faulty oral transmission, or a compositor trying to go and make a hyper correction to the text. Apart from that, he left us with a lot of other manuscripts, a lot of other manuscript things, which hopefully will be brought to the press soon. He wrote various commentaries on the Shulchan that we mentioned. Also, he wrote responsa, which are waiting to be published, and also a fair amount of writing on medieval Hebrew poetry. But to me, his greatest achievement that he'll always be known for is the Keter Shemtob, but perhaps his greatest achievement in his life was the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, where he preceded the work of modern scholars who only now are bringing out new editions of the Shulchan Aruch in the last few years, where all the variant texts and the changes in the texts are being listed. And he seemed to have been light years ahead from anyone else, light years ahead of his time, and possibly not always understood in a fair light either by his contemporaries or by the audience today. And with that, I want to go and throw the floor open for whoever would like to ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that extremely informative presentation. If anyone has any questions, they can unmute. Oh, we have Gregory.
Hi, yes. Thank you very much for this. But I'm curious, is the commentary Mr. Hanukkah at all available in print today? Or is it just something you'd find like on Hebrew books someplace?
You won't even find it on Hebrew books. What happened was that in 1940, 2 simanim were printed in the Journal of Montefiore College called Yehudit, and they're available on an external hard drive called Otzara Hochma, which is commercially available. The other is still in manuscript. He mentions it in various parts in the Keter Shemtob, but to edit it is going to take several years of work. And I'm not quite there yet. It's something that I want to go and do in my lifetime, but when it'll get done, when it'll see the light of day, I don't know. But other than this manuscript copy and the references that he makes in the Keter Shemtob and the bits that were published in the magazine Yehudit, it's not available, no.
Any other questions? I'll ask, what exactly was the purpose of the Keter Shemtov, other than sort of being a nice collection that's very, very interesting and valuable, I mean, Hakim in the area, but did he have a specific purpose?
Yes, he writes in volume 3 what his purpose was, and that is that when he came to Manchester, he was exposed to Jews, practicing Jews, who didn't know what, had no Kabbalistic input into their prayers. And he came from a family that was, himself was a very of Kabbalists of repute, and he came from a family, 4 generations or 5 generations of Kabbalists of repute. And he writes in the 3rd volume of his complete and utter surprise that he went to this place called Manchester, and there was this whole collection of people we'd never imagined existed, who had no Kabbalistic input into the prayers. So how can this be? The Kabbalah is the kernel of Judaism, its inner and most sacred heart. How could it be that there's a group of people who willfully excluded from anything to do with their liturgy? I mean, when he was in Jerusalem, he'd encountered the Yemenite Jews who followed faithfully the teachings of the Rambam, who didn't have anything very much Kabbalistic in their prayers. But other than that, he never imagined or never dreamed that there would be a group of Sephardim from Spain, which is the same place that he came, his family came from, who had no Kabbalistic input in their prayers at all and did things that were quite contrary to the teachings of the Kabbalah. And so maybe it was his way of trying to work through this problem. And in all fairness, in the Keter Shemtov, he's very even-handed. He doesn't openly condemn the Spanish Portuguese Jews. He's very tolerant of them, and every quirk of their minhag or anyone else's minhag, he tries to find some justification for it within the framework of that he's got. There's only one place where there's a mistake in the Spanish and Portuguese prayer book that was printed in London by Dr. Gaston. In the volume of Sukkot, he mentions that on the first day of Sukkot, in Kiddush, you should say Shechianu. And he mentions the stark, this obviously was a printing mistake. It's never been in any prayer book before or after that. And in the revision of the prayer book, it was corrected, but this is a warning there to the people who are responsible for printing the prayer book. They should be careful to delete this next time. But other than that, he has no problem with any custom. He finds a justification for it or a reason for it or some slight support for it. He's very tolerant, very easygoing. But at the time when he came to Manchester, he was somewhat jolted by this attitude. Okay.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to close it for tonight. Dr. Shasha, you mentioned that people can find you on Facebook after?
Yes, sure. I'm on Facebook. If anyone has any questions they want to go and ask that I didn't cover, I'm very happy to go and answer them. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Chag Sameach.
Modim Simcha from Jerusalem. Bye.
Bye-bye.